Today I'm working on my brakes, Hayes Stroker Aces. As of right now, it's about a 12-year-old design. It's been out of production for several years. It's a decent enough brake though. It's got the radial mount master cylinder. It has a forged 4-piston monoblock caliper. Caliper is built out of one piece of alloy, which does reduce the likelihood of it developing leaks. It did develop a set of leaks, and once we replaced all the seals and pistons, it's been pretty reliable since then. So this is a pretty handy feature. It enables you to either make your contact point closer to the handlebar or farther away from the handlebar, so you can get it set right where you want it to be. That's certainly a nice feature to have on your brakes. It's a huge improvement to the non-tool free design here. There you can see it takes an Allen key to do your reach adjustment. So if the brake lever gets to a point that you don't like, you've got to stop, dig in your pack, find your multi-tool, fuss with and find the correct size Allen key, make your adjustment, then stow your multi-tool. The tool-free adjustment winds up being a huge benefit. The problem I'm having today specifically is that the adjuster has developed some play. On the left, you can just barely make out. Right there, there's a detent ball, and that free play exceeds the depth to engage the detent. So as I'm riding down a rough section of trail and the brake lever's rattling back and forth, the adjustment is free to roll in one direction or another. And I wound up having to stop several times in the middle of a downhill section of trail to adjust the brake adjuster back out. An additional problem to having play here, anytime there's free movement between metal parts as it goes from one extreme to the other, there's a slight hammering effect. And so while there's not a lot of weight to this brake lever, just that constant motion will eventually cause a hammering action that starts to deform the parts. Oh look, the other side's doing the same thing. Now the correct way to repair this would be to purchase new lever blade assemblies. They come with the blade and the internals and the grub screw. Retail on those is $30. Those are currently sold out everywhere I've looked, and this is a discontinued brake, so I doubt that the manufacturer is going to run another production run of lever blades for a brake they're no longer selling. Also on that thought is that $30 each for the levers, another $30 per axle for pads. Maybe you're paying somebody to bleed these. You're pretty close to spending as much money fixing an old set of brakes as it would cost you to buy a brand new set of brakes. And it would make a lot more sense to buy new brakes because this is an older model, it's outdated technology, and it's just worked well for its time, but there are better offerings now, and fixing these, spending real money on it would be a case of throwing good money after bad. So I'm going to try and fix these with only materials that I already have on hand, preferably without spending any money on them. Take the money saved for those brake levers and put it towards a braking system upgrade. Real quickly, just blah, 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 braking system, blah, 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 safety critical, blah, 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 injury up to and including death, blah, 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 legal liability if you happen to use this bicycle on public roads. So, yeah, blah, 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 take your own risks. Using my feeler gauges, measuring that play at about 20 thousandths or 1/2 millimeter. There's a small grub screw that holds the lever in place. I'm going to go ahead and remove it completely because they've been coming loose and I want to add some Loctite. There are 3 pieces here. There's the rotating collar in the middle, and on either side, a crescent-shaped spacer. There's the detent. The detent is just a small ball bearing with a spring behind it. I'm going to be careful that that doesn't get misplaced. So there's barely any wear on the lever itself. It's 12.2 millimeters. It's 12.2 millimeters in this dimension and 12.3 millimeters in this dimension, the one where it would be getting the wear from being loaded up under braking power. So I think the wear is either on these pieces here, or here. Here's the ball and the spring of the detent. Those are 2 very small pieces that will disappear and make your afternoon a real challenge if you can't locate them. So let's find a place to put those. I think I'm going to put those in a bag because I've chased small parts like that around on the floor, and that's not a fun way to spend your afternoon. Hopefully that'll keep those from finding a new home off in a corner under the workbench where I'll never see them again. I'm going to give everything a quick bath with some isopropyl. See that the anodizing has been worn off at the forward and the backward portions of the lever itself. There's a product available called ShimStock, which is various materials made to a specific thickness. And I think that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to, in between the adjuster and these 2 crescent-shaped spacers, I'm going to apply a shim. I'm going to have to apply it on the side of the adjuster that does not have the spring-loaded detent in it. I'm going to use some high-density polyethylene shim today, and rather than buy ShimStock, I've just cut a piece out of an old milk container. It happens to measure approximately 20 thousandths, approximately half a millimeter, maybe maybe just a little more, but I think that should take out all of the play. This dimension is about 6.2 millimeters. So I need to figure out how to make a 6.2 millimeter approximate hole in that milk carton. This is a run-of-the-mill paper hole puncher, but it's about 6.4. Let's see how tight a fit that makes. That actually fits good enough for my standards. The correct tool for matching the outer diameter would be a hole punch from a hole punch set. They make them for working leather, for making gasket material. I don't have one of those tools, and I'm trying to keep costs to a minimum today. I noticed that an old chainring bolt seems to be about the same size. I'm gonna try to sharpen that inner edge a little bit. Just gonna give it a quick kiss with a drill bit. Well, hello, sailor. Are you in port long? No, ma'am. Just for the night. I sure do like the cut of your flute. Well, thank you. You kiss your mother with that mouth? You want me to call you mommy? Not a perfect edge, but it is a little bit sharper, and that will serve my needs for today. That is by no means perfect. But I think it's gonna suit my purposes. On the adjuster, you can see there's the hole for the spring and the detents. We need to apply this on the opposite side. Just a dab of grease to try and encourage the spring and ball to stay in place. That'll also help to prevent moisture intrusion once it's installed. That's actually a really tight fit. All right. Because it was difficult to press in, I think not only is the brake lever worn on this circumference here, but I think in this dimension here, there's a little bit of a convex, concave wear pattern within that bore. All right, and it does get a little bit of resistance, so it rotates real freely in that dimension, but it starts to bind. Starts to bind at that angle there. But that's not in the range of motion of the braking system. All right. I want to give just a dab of some red thread lock. encourage that screw to stay in place. Back here at the master cylinder. So let's see. Where this starts to bind, we can see it would already be buried in the handlebar. So it does have free range of motion through the arc of travel for the brake lever. I do have to mount it in this orientation, so this, you can barely see the disc there, the PTFE. I don't want that positioned where it would be under load when the brakes are applied, because that pressure might deform the shape of the PTFE. So the side that it's mounted right now is not under load during braking. All right. So when the brakes are applied, the lever is distributing the load right here. That transfers onto that crescent-shaped spacer, which transfers the load onto the winder, and then internally that load is transferred onto the threads of the push rod for the master cylinder. So when I'm squeezing the brakes, the plastic piece is relaxed and all the load is on this side here. And that's actually, it's not perfect, but that is a huge improvement. So there's not as much play inside the adjuster, and the ball pops into the holes for the detent with a nice crisp feel. I don't think this is going to be adjusting itself on its own anymore. Let me grab some lubricant. Well, I got it pieced back together, and I got to take it out on a ride. There's still just a touch of play there, but it's significantly less. And that does actually improve the feel on the bike. Unfortunately, it's still rattling out and winding itself in. I've got to stop and take opportunities to readjust it, which is kind of disappointing because I also mounted this sweet bugle horn. And so I've got a clear section of trail. I could be blowing my own horn, but no, I've got to adjust the winder on the brakes. I do have one other thought about what I could possibly do to get this fixed. So I can just barely feel the detent ball engaging there. Make sure I don't lose it. I think the problem is this piece here. So this is the piece that's wearing more than the other parts of it. It's actually made of steel. So I'm surprised that the ferrous part is wearing more quickly than the aluminum alloy part in this case. You can see by the discoloration, it's got some kind of coating, sort of that dark gray coloration, that's completely worn off on this side where it rubs against the brake lever. You can see it's also worn off where the detent balls engage. Yeah, the gray coating is worn off in that circular pattern where it engages with the this piece here. I think that wear has made the overall depth of those 6 machined surfaces a little bit shallower. The material has just worn down in this direction, so those bores aren't as deep as they used to be. The detent ball bearing is about 1.6 millimeters, 1.5, 1.6 millimeters diameter. I have a 1/16 inch drill bit, and that measures right at 1.6 millimeters too. So, of course, I'm measuring the shank and not the actual cutting surface, but I think that's going to be close enough for what I need. I'm going to try and use the drill bit to just very gently make each of these 6 holes just a little bit deeper so the ball bearing has a little bit more depth to engage. It'd be preferable to have a drill press or a mill. See if we can't make this work though. Alrighty, that's definitely more depth for the ball to engage with. Yeah, definitely more of a solid feel to where the detent ball is sitting. It does take a good bit more effort to get that to start turning. Hopefully it won't turn on its own while riding. Take it out and see how it does. All right, had this thing out again for another trail test. The engagements are nice and crisp, so still feeling like the detents are working well. But on the front, I persist in it rattling itself looser and looser while I ride. I've got the brake lever removed from the master cylinder again, and I think the brake rattling loose is not related to the detent. There is a flat. There's a flat machined onto the rod that activates the master cylinder. You can see the flat portion right there. And I think this rod is just rotating freely while riding. So I think the adjuster is remaining fixed in place, and this is just rotating inside the brake lever. That flat portion is supposed to engage. It's supposed to, hit the flat on this side and the flat on this side and not be able to rotate. You can see there's just a little bit of wear. The anodizing has rubbed away, but it's not measurable in terms of the thickness, the width of that gap isn't any wider here where it's worn than it is down in these other portions of the brake lever. So I think the wear is actually here on the steel push rod So I'm going to try to close that gap just a little bit to see if I can keep the rod from being able to rotate freely inside the brake lever. Just going to squeeze it a little bit in the vise. So I've managed to tighten that opening on the brake lever, tighten that just a little bit. And now it's engaging the flat portion of the push rod and should keep it from rotating. Of course, aluminum doesn't bend very well, and you can see it's got some cracks in it there, so I think I'm going to apply the rule of threes here. The third attempt at fixing it was also the one that broke it, and I'm going to go ahead and retire this braking system, I think. Back at the workbench, got the brakes removed from the bicycle. I'm not going to put them back on. These are retired now. I don't want to risk that lever blade failing where it's already cracked. Not really to feel too bad though. The braking system, all in all, is pretty completely worn out. Here we can see the rotor. Wear limit on the rotor is specified as being 1.8 millimeters. Measure its original thickness here. Okay, so original thickness is about 1.94 millimeters. Up here where the groove is worn the thinnest, it's worn to less than 1.8 millimeters. The area swiped by the pads is, let's see, it's pretty glazed. Looks like it's been cooked pretty well. The pads are pretty well smoked also. So let's see. So the trailing edge has some braking material, but the leading edge is essentially gone. So another outing, and this would have been metal on metal. This one should look a little better in the light. And the friction material also is fairly glazed. With so little material to absorb the heat in the rotor and in the pads, they would oscillate. I would squeeze the brakes and they wouldn't work because they were glazed over, and then they would get hot enough to work, and then they would fade out a little bit because they got real hot. So this is all pretty much done. Incidentally, the replacement's been here the whole time. A lot of good options right now. I went with Hope. Went with Hope Tech, and I went with Hope Tech for a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons is they come in some pretty interesting colors. You can get blue or red, orange. You can even get purple, and I do like to have a pop of color on my bike. I went with black. So we've got more points of adjustment on the master cylinder, and another nice single piece caliper with 4 pistons. The other reason that I went with Hope is that they make this V4 rotor. This one's in a 203 millimeter, but what's really interesting about this rotor, they make it as a ventilated rotor. It's common in automotive applications, but almost unheard of on bicycles. This is the only one that I'm aware of being available. It's not compatible with other brake calipers. So you can see the thickness of that sandwiched rotor is more than 3 millimeters, whereas the thickness of most brake rotors is less than 2. So you got to have a wider caliper in order to accommodate the width of that rotor. Now that I'm going to have some really nice brakes on my bike, I'm really going to be able to ride slow. Thanks for watching.